The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Vienna's Grand Palace Hotel, catching the crystal chandeliers and sending rainbow-colored light dancing across the marble floors. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in flowing gowns mingled. Beneath high ceilings, their laughter mixing with the gentle notes of a string quartet tucked away in the corner. It was the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser, one of the most prestigious charity events in Austria. Anton Volkov stood near the champagne fountain, a flute of bubbling liquid untouched in his hand. At 43, he carried himself with the confident posture of someone who had spent countless hours on stage. His dark hair was styled perfectly, with just the right amount of silver at the temples to make him look distinguished rather than old. The slight frown on his face went unnoticed by the people who kept approaching him. Wealthy donors eager to tell the famous pianist how much they admired his latest album or his sold-out performance at Carnegie Hall. "Mr. Volkov, we're absolutely thrilled you could make it tonight," gushed a woman with diamonds sparkling at her throat. "My husband and I saw you in London last spring. Simply magical." Anton smiled politely. "You're very kind. Thank you for supporting the Children's Hospital." This was his third charity event this month. While he believed in the causes, the events themselves had begun to blur together. The same conversations, the same admirers, the same carefully measured compliments. He excused himself after a few minutes, claiming he needed to find his manager. Instead, Anton wandered away from the main ballroom, loosening his bow tie slightly as he escaped down a quieter hallway. The sounds of the party faded with each step. He had been playing piano since he was 4 years old, had performed in front of royalty and presidents, had won every major classical music award worth winning. Yet lately, something felt missing. The joy he once found in music had dimmed, replaced by routine and obligation. Anton paused as he passed an open door leading to what appeared to be a small library or reading room. Through the doorway, he spotted something that made him step. Inside, a beautiful grand piano tucked in the corner, its polished black surface gleaming in the soft light. It wasn't the main performance piano for the event. That one stood on a small stage in the ballroom. This one seemed forgotten, a piece of decorative furniture rather than an instrument. He walked over and ran his fingers along its edge. It was a Bösendorfer, Austrian-made, expensive, with a rich tone that many pianists, including himself, preferred for certain pieces. Anton glanced around. The room was empty except for bookshelves, a few leather armchairs, and the piano. A moment of solitude was exactly what he needed. He sat down at the bench, lifted the cover, and placed his fingers lightly on the keys without pressing down. Even this simple gesture felt like coming home. He closed his eyes, deciding what to play. Not the showpieces he was known for, the technically demanding Liszt or fiery Rachmaninoff that made audiences leap to their feet. Something quieter, something just for himself. Anton began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece he rarely performed in concerts because it wasn't flashy enough to showcase his technical skills. But its gentle melody and flowing rhythm had always moved him. His fingers moved with practiced ease, drawing out the delicate notes. For the first time that evening, he felt the tension leaving his shoulders. He was so absorbed in the music that he didn't notice someone had entered the room, until he heard a soft noise, the sound of a cleaning cloth being set down on a side table. Anton's eyes opened, his hands stilling on the keys. A woman stood near the doorway, a serving tray tucked under her arm and a cleaning cloth in her hand. She wore the black and white uniform of the catering staff, simple, practical clothing that stood in stark contrast to the expensive outfits in the main ballroom. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice carrying a hint of an Eastern European accent. "I didn't mean to interrupt, I was just cleaning the empty rooms." Anton waved away her concern. "It's fine. I was hiding from the party anyway." The woman smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes, warm brown eyes that seemed younger than her face, which showed the gentle lines of someone in their late 40s or early 50s. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, light brown with streaks of gray. "You play beautifully," she said, making no move to leave. "Debussy, yes?" Anton raised an eyebrow, surprised that a member of the catering staff would recognize the piece. "Yes, Clair de Lune." Moonlight, she translated, nodding. It's one of my favorites. Something about her manner intrigued him. She wasn't fawning over him or trying to impress him. She simply stated her opinion as if they were equals discussing music. You know classical music? He asked. I know piano music, she clarified. My father was very strict about my lessons when I was young. Anton found himself curious. You play? A shadow passed over her face. I used to, many years ago. She shook her head slightly. But listen to me going on while you're trying to have a moment alone. Please continue. I'll come back later to clean. No, stay, Anton said, surprising himself with the invitation. What's your name? Elena, she answered. Elena Petrova. Russian? She nodded. From Moscow originally, but I've been in Vienna for almost 20 years now. Anton switched to Russian, his mother's native language. I'm Anton Volkov. I know who you are, Mr. Volkov, Elena replied in the same language, her accent becoming more pronounced and natural. Everyone here does. Your face is on the program for tonight's event. Anton laughed, a genuine sound that felt good after hours of forced smiles. Of course, how silly of me. He gestured to the tray under her arm. Don't let me keep you from your work. My shift actually ended 10 minutes ago, Elena admitted. I was just finishing up before heading home. Anton's fingers returned to the keys, playing soft chords without any particular melody. And what? Does a former piano student think of tonight's fancy gathering? Elena leaned slightly against the doorframe, seeming to consider whether to answer honestly. I think the people here care more about being seen as generous than about the children they're supposedly helping. Her bluntness made Anton laugh again. I think you might be right. From the main ballroom, they could hear the event host speaking into a microphone, probably introducing some important donor or announcing the auction results. Neither of them moved to return to the party. What kind of music did you play? Anton asked, still idly pressing keys. When you used to play, I mean. Elena's expression softened with memory. Everything my teachers assigned, of course, but I loved the romantics most, Chopin especially. Anton nodded approvingly. Every serious piano student had a period of Chopin obsession. The Polish composer's works were technically challenging but emotionally accessible, perfect for developing both skill and artistry. His nocturnes were my favorite to play late at night, Elena continued, when everyone else was asleep and the apartment was quiet. As they talked, Anton noticed a few guests from the gala wandering into the room, champagne glasses in hand. They were probably exploring the historic building or looking for a quiet place to talk. They nodded respectfully to Anton but maintained their distance, not wanting to interrupt what appeared to be a private conversation. A playful idea struck Anton. The evening had been so dreadfully boring until now. Perhaps he could liven it up a bit. He turned to Elena, who was now watching the newcomers with a hint of self-consciousness, clearly aware of the class difference between herself and the wealthy guests. Would you like me to play something for you, Elena? Anton asked loudly enough for the others to hear. Something simple that you might enjoy? The small group of guests perked up at this impromptu offering from the famous pianist. A woman in a red dress nudged her companion and whispered something. Soon a few more people drifted into the room, drawn by the prospect of a free private concert. Elena blushed slightly, sensing she was suddenly part of a performance rather than a conversation. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. Not at all. Anton insisted, a hint of mischief in his eyes. For a fellow piano enthusiast, it would be my pleasure. He turned to the keyboard, making a show of thinking about what to play. The truth was, he had already decided. He would play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, beautiful but deliberately simplified compared to what he was capable of. Something a talented amateur could appreciate, but not fully understand. It was slightly condescending, he knew, but he was in a mood to perform, to remind himself and everyone present of his skill. As Anton began to play, more people filtered into the room, standing in small clusters by the bookshelves or leaning against the walls. Elena remained by the door, her serving tray still tucked under her arm, her expression unreadable as she listened to the music fill the space. Anton played well, he always did, but with a calculated restraint. His fingers danced over the keys with precision rather than passion. He glanced occasionally at Elena, expecting to see awe or gratitude on her face. Instead, he found her watching his hands with focused attention, her head slightly tilted as if she were studying his technique. The piece ended, and polite applause filled the small room. Anton nodded his acknowledgement, accepting the praise as his due. But his eyes returned to Elena, curious about her reaction. "Thank you," she said simply. "That was lovely." There was something in her tone, not quite criticism but not quite admiration either, that caught Anton's attention. For someone who claimed to love Chopin, she seemed underwhelmed. This unexpected response intrigued him more than any effusive praise could have. What Anton didn't know yet was that this chance meeting, this small interaction born from his boredom and mild condescension, was about to change everything. The next few minutes would shake his understanding of talent, of music, and of the assumptions he made about the people he encountered in his privileged world. But for now, he simply smiled at the quiet woman in the catering uniform and waited to see what would happen next. The small library room had grown crowded. What began as Anton's escape from the gala had turned into an impromptu gathering, with at least 20 people now standing around the piano. They whispered among themselves, excited to have stumbled upon a private performance by the great Anton Volkov. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit had even sent his assistant to fetch more champagne for the growing audience. Anton ran his fingers lightly over the keys, considering what to play next. He glanced at Elena, who still stood near the doorway looking increasingly uncomfortable as more wealthy guests filled the room. She clutched her serving tray like a shield, clearly aware she didn't belong in this gathering, at least not as a guest. "Perhaps I should go," Elena said quietly in Russian. "They'll be wondering where I am in the kitchen." "Didn't you say your shift was over?" Anton replied in the same language, enjoying the private conversation amid the English and German being spoken around them. Elena nodded reluctantly. "Yes, but—" "Then stay," Anton insisted. He switched back to English and addressed the room. "I think we should have one more piece before returning to the gala, don't you?" The gathered guests murmured their agreement, settling in for another performance. Someone had brought in extra chairs from a neighboring room, turning the space into a makeshift concert hall. Anton noticed the event organizer hovering by the door, looking both annoyed and impressed that the evening's star attraction had created his own side event. Anton turned back to the piano, deciding to give them something with more flair this time. He launched into Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a crowd pleaser with its dramatic shifts from melancholy to manic energy. His fingers flew across the keys during the fast sections, drawing gasps from the audience. He played with more enthusiasm, now feeding off their reactions, adding extra flourishes to showcase his technical mastery. When he finished with a theatrical final chord, the room erupted in applause. Anton stood and gave a small bow, accepting their admiration with practiced grace. As the clapping subsided, he noticed Elena watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, not quite criticism, but something like thoughtful assessment. "Well," Anton said, returning to his conversation with Elena, as if the performance had been merely a brief interruption. "You said you played Chopin. Do you still play at all?" Elena shook her head. "Not really. I have an old upright piano in my apartment, but it's badly out of tune. And my hands." She looked down at her work-roughened hands. "They're not what they used to be." Anton followed her gaze. Her fingers were long and slender despite the visible effects of years of manual work, the kind of hands that piano teachers notice in young students and mark as promising. A woman in an emerald dress approached them, champagne flute in hand. "Mr. Volkov, that was simply magnificent. Will you be playing again later at the main event?" "Yes, just one piece during the final fundraising appeal," Anton answered politely, though his attention remained on Elena. The woman seemed to notice Elena for the first time, taking in her catering uniform with a flicker of surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Not at all," Anton said. "This is Elena Petrova. She's a fellow pianist." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "How lovely. Do you perform locally, Ms. Petrova?" Elena smiled tightly. "No, I don't perform. I just played for my own enjoyment." An awkward silence followed. The woman nodded politely and drifted away, rejoining her companions who were examining the bookshelves as if they contained rare treasures rather than the hotel's decorative collection of leather-bound classics. "I shouldn't have put you on the spot," Anton said, switching back to Russian. "Forgive me." Elena shrugged. "There's nothing to forgive. But I should really go now." Something made Anton want to keep her there. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, or maybe it was the way she had listened to him play, with understanding rather than just admiration. "Before you go," he said, the playful idea returning, "would you like to try the piano?" Elena's eyes widened. "What? No, I couldn't possibly." "Why not? You said you played, and this is a magnificent instrument. When will you get another chance to play a Bosendorfer like this?" "Mr. Volkov, there are people here, important people. All the more reason," Anton said with a mischievous smile. "Give them something unexpected. I promise they're not as intimidating as they look." A few of the guests had overheard the exchange and were watching with interest. The idea of a catering staff member playing the piano that Anton Volkov had just performed seemed to amuse them. "Let her play," called out a jovial man with a British accent, clearly enjoying the unusual turn of events. "We'll be a democratic audience tonight." Elena shot Anton a look that was part panic, part irritation. He had put her in an impossible position. To refuse now would seem ungracious, but to play after him in front of this crowd. "Just a short piece," Anton encouraged, standing up from the bench and gesturing toward it. "Something simple. Anything you remember." More guests were voicing their support now, their faces showing the indulgent smiles of people prepared to be kindly toward what they assumed would be a fumbling amateur attempt. Anton felt a twinge of guilt for orchestrating this situation, but his curiosity overrode it. There was something about Elena that didn't fit the role she occupied, and he wanted to know more. Elena set her serving tray down on a side table with deliberate care. She straightened her black uniform jacket and smoothed back a strand of hair that had escaped her bun. Then, with dignity that surprised even Anton, she walked to the piano. "It has been many years," she said simply to the room. "Please forgive any mistakes." She sat down at the bench, adjusting it slightly, and placed her hands on the keys. Anton noticed she positioned her fingers with the proper curved shape that piano teachers drill into their students. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room. Anton had expected her to play something straightforward, perhaps a simple nocturne or waltz. But the ballade was one of Chopin's most challenging works, demanding both technical skill and emotional depth. He watched in growing astonishment as Elena's fingers moved across the keyboard with confident precision. Her technique wasn't perfect. There were small hesitations in some of the more difficult passages, but the musicality, the understanding of Chopin's intentions, was undeniable. She played with a vulnerability and honesty that many professional pianists struggled to achieve, letting the music's narrative unfold naturally, rather than forcing drama where it didn't belong. The chattering in the room had ceased entirely. The guests, who had been prepared to offer polite applause for an amateur effort, now stood in stunned silence. Anton found himself moving closer to the piano, watching Elena's hands with growing fascination. As the piece progressed to its more technically demanding sections, Elena's brow furrowed in concentration. Anton could see the moment when memory took over, years of practice resurfacing after long dormancy. Her hands moved faster, more confidently, as if remembering their purpose. When she reached the thunderous finale, Her whole body became part of the performance, swaying slightly with the music's building intensity. The final chords resonated through the room with such power that Anton felt them in his chest. Then silence. Elena's hands rested on the keys for a moment before she slowly withdrew them to her lap. She opened her eyes, blinking as if waking from a dream, and looked up to find the entire room staring at her in amazement. The applause began with a single person, the British man who had called for her to play, and quickly spread until it was louder than what Anton had received. There were exclamations of surprise and delight, people turning to their companions with wide eyes and raised eyebrows. Anton found himself clapping as hard as anyone. His initial amusement had transformed into genuine respect. This woman, this catering staff member in her simple black and white uniform, had just delivered a performance worthy of any concert hall. Elena's cheeks flushed with color. She stood quickly, giving a small, awkward bow before trying to retreat to her forgotten serving tray. Anton intercepted her. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Elena looked up at him, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face: pride, embarrassment, and something like defiance. "Moscow Conservatory," she answered. "I studied there for 6 years." Anton stared at her in disbelief. The Moscow Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Its graduates went on to international careers, not to serving canapes at charity events. "But how?" he began, but was interrupted as several guests approached, eager to speak with the unexpected talent in their midst. "My dear, that was remarkable. Where do you perform? Do you teach?" Elena fielded their questions with growing confidence, though Anton could see she was overwhelmed by the sudden attention. The event organizer had pushed his way through the crowd and was speaking urgently into his phone, gesturing toward Elena. "Ladies and gentlemen," called out a woman who appeared to be in charge of the gala. "This has been a wonderful surprise, but we must return to the main ballroom for the final fundraising appeal. Mr. Volkov is scheduled to perform there in 15 minutes. The guests began to filter out, many pausing to compliment Elena or ask for her contact information. She responded politely but vaguely, making no promises to follow up. As the room emptied, Anton found himself standing alone with Elena once more. The playful, slightly condescending attitude he had shown earlier was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and a growing sense that he had stumbled upon someone truly remarkable. "We need to talk," he said simply. "After my performance. Will you wait?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'll wait." As Anton walked toward the main ballroom, preparing to fulfill his obligation to the event, his mind kept returning to the image of Elena's hands moving across the keys, creating beauty that no one in that room had expected. He had come to this gala feeling empty, going through the motions of being Anton Volkov, famous pianist. Now, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt truly awake. Something important had just happened, something that went beyond music. And Anton was determined to understand what it was. Anton stood on the small stage in the main ballroom, bowing as the applause washed over him. He had just finished playing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece chosen for its dramatic flair and ability to loosen wealthy donors' grips on their checkbooks. The performance had gone well, technically flawless as always, but his mind had been elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Elena and her extraordinary playing. The Chopin Ballade was no simple piece for hobbyists. It required years of serious training and natural talent. What was a Moscow Conservatory graduate doing working as catering staff? How had someone with her abilities ended up serving champagne instead of performing on stage? As he made his way through the crowd, accepting compliments and deflecting invitations to various dinner parties and gallery openings, Anton scanned the room for Elena. He had asked her to wait, but would she? Perhaps the embarrassment of being put on the spot had been too much, and she had slipped away while he was performing. Finally, he spotted her standing near one of the service doors, still in her catering uniform but no longer carrying a tray. She seemed to be watching him, her expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, she gave a small nod, indicating she had kept her promise to wait. Anton excused himself from a conversation with a persistent arts patron and made his way toward her. As he approached, he noticed several people glancing in Elena's direction and whispering behind their hands. Word of her playing had spread through the gala. "Thank you for waiting," Anton said when he reached her. "Can we talk somewhere quieter?" Elena nodded. The staff break room should be empty now. Most of the servers are busy with the dessert service. She led him through the service door and down a utilitarian hallway, far from the opulence of the main hotel. They passed a busy kitchen, where chefs and servers moved in choreographed chaos, then turned down another corridor. Elena opened a door to a small plain room with a few tables and chairs, a coffee machine, and a wall of lockers. "Not quite as glamorous as the library," she said with a slight smile, gesturing for him to sit. Anton took a chair, suddenly aware of how strange it was for him, a celebrated concert pianist whose performances commanded hundreds of dollars per ticket, to be sitting in a staff break room. Yet here, away from the gala's pretensions, he felt more comfortable than he had all evening. "You studied at the Moscow Conservatory," he said, jumping straight to what had been burning in his mind. Elena took the chair across from him. "Yes, from 1992 to 1998. Anton did the mental math. "That would make you 49, she supplied. "A bit old to be launching a performing career, don't you think?" There was a hint of self-deprecating humor in her voice, but Anton didn't smile. "Age is irrelevant when you play like that. What happened? Why didn't you pursue music professionally?" Elena sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly. "Life happened, Mr. Volkov. Not everyone gets the same chances. Call me Anton, please, and I'd like to understand if you're willing to tell me." Elena studied him for a moment, perhaps assessing his sincerity. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded and began to speak. "I was on track for a performing career. My professors said I had promise, but in my final year my father became very ill. Lung cancer. My mother had died years before, and I was an only child. There was no one else to care for him." Anton nodded, understanding immediately. "So you left the conservatory?" "I completed my degree, but barely. I was splitting my time between classes and the hospital. My performance work suffered. When graduation came, I didn't have the portfolio of competition wins or the network of connections needed to launch a solo career. But surely there were other options, teaching, accompanying chamber groups." Elena gave him a look that made Anton realize how naive his question was. This was Russia in the late 1990s, after the economic collapse. Music jobs were scarce, and I needed steady money for my father's treatments. So I took an office job with a German company that was opening in Moscow. The pay was good, the hours were regular, and they offered health insurance. And the piano became something I did in the evenings when I could. My father died 6 months after I started working. I kept telling myself I would find my way back to music eventually. She shrugged. Life kept moving forward. The German company transferred me to Vienna in 2005. I've been here ever since, but not playing professionally, Anton said, still struggling to reconcile her talent with her current situation. The company downsized during the 2008 financial crisis. I found other work, office jobs mainly. When those became harder to find, I started working in service, catering, hotel work, whatever I could get. She gestured to her uniform. "It pays the rent. Not everyone gets to make a living from their passion, Anton." The way she said it, without bitterness, just stating a reality, made Anton feel a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for his own good fortune, guilt for having taken it for granted, and admiration for Elena's resilience. "Tonight was the first time I've played on a proper concert grand in..." She paused, calculating. "Almost 20 years. Anton stared at her in disbelief. "And yet you played Chopin's ballade as if I practice every day?" Elena finished for him. "I do. On my old upright with the sticky B-flat key and the out-of-tune high register. 2 hours every evening without fail. It keeps me sane." The revelation struck Anton deeply. While he had been growing bored with his successful career, taking his access to the finest instruments and venues for granted. This woman had been faithfully practicing on a subpar piano in what he imagined was a modest apartment, with no audience. But herself, why that piece, he asked. The ballade is so demanding. If you knew you might play for an audience someday. I didn't play for them, Elena said simply. I played for myself. I choose pieces that challenge me, that still have something to teach me. Besides, a small private smile crossed her face. When I play, I'm not a 49-year-old catering server anymore. I'm just music. Anton understood exactly what she meant. It was how he had felt about playing when he was younger, before success had turned music into a career rather than a calling. You should be performing, he said firmly. Teaching masterclasses, not serving champagne to people who wouldn't know Chopin from Brahms if their lives depended on it. Elena laughed softly. You make it sound so simple. It could be, Anton leaned forward, a sudden idea taking shape. I'm doing a small recital series next month. 3 performances in Vienna's Musikverein. Intimate setting, just about 200 seats. The Musikverein has no small halls, Elena pointed out. Even the Brahms Saal holds over 600 people. You know your concert venues, Anton noted with approval. It's actually in the Glazerner Saal, the glass hall, a special series for what they're calling musical conversations. I've been trying to figure out the right format. Now I know. Elena's expression turned wary. What are you suggesting? Be my guest artist. We could play some solo pieces, some duets. I'd feature you in the program. The color drained from Elena's face. That's not funny, Anton. I'm not joking. You're brilliant. You deserve to be heard. Elena stood up abruptly. I haven't performed in public since my graduation recital. That was over 25 years ago. And yet you played beautifully tonight with no preparation on an unfamiliar instrument, in front of an audience that intimidated you. Anton stood as well, energized by his idea. Imagine what you could do with proper preparation, on your own terms. You're caught up in the moment, Elena said, shaking her head. Tomorrow you'll realize how impractical this is. I'm not a performer anymore. The woman I heard play tonight is absolutely a performer, Anton insisted. Whether she's doing it on a stage or in her living room doesn't change that fact. Elena looked at him with a mixture of longing and fear. Even if I wanted to, and I'm not saying I do, I have responsibilities, a job, bills to pay. I would take care of all that, a proper artist's fee, enough to cover time off for rehearsals. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Anton considered the question seriously. Why was he so determined to help this woman he had just met? Was it merely guilt for his earlier condescension, professional respect for her obvious talent? Or something more, a recognition of the pure love for music that he feared he had been losing? Because when you played, he said finally, I remembered why I became a pianist in the first place. Not for the applause or the fame or the money, but for those moments when the music takes over and nothing else matters. I've been missing that feeling for a long time. Elena's expression softened. And you think putting me on stage will help you find it again? I think hearing you play reminded me it exists. That's worth something. Anton smiled. Besides, my manager is always telling me to find ways to make my recitals unique and memorable. This would certainly qualify. Elena didn't respond immediately. She walked over to the window, which looked out on the hotel's service area rather than the grand view afforded to the ballroom. Delivery trucks and staff vehicles sat in neat rows under security lights. When I was at the conservatory, she said, quietly, my teacher once told me I had the technical skill to be good but lacked the emotional courage to be great. She turned back to face Anton. I've often wondered if he was right. Play with me, Anton urged, and prove him wrong. A long moment passed between them. Then Elena took a deep breath. I would need to get my hands back in proper condition, and time to practice on a good instrument. Anton felt a surge of excitement. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, Elena said, but a smile was tugging at the corners of her mouth. I'll need to think about it, and I'd want to hear exactly what you have in mind for the program. Of course, Anton agreed quickly. We can meet this week to discuss it. I'll have my manager draw up a proper proposal. Elena nodded, looking slightly dazed, as if she couldn't quite believe the turn her evening had taken. I should get back. They'll be wondering where I've gone. Can I have your phone number to arrange our meeting? Elena hesitated only briefly, before reciting her number, which Anton saved in his phone. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. As they walked back toward the main part of the hotel, Anton felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The evening had started with him playing a role, Anton Volkov, famous pianist, going through the motions at yet another charity event. Now he felt like himself again, excited about music and its possibilities. Just before they reached the service door that would return them to the gala, Elena paused. Anton, she said, her voice serious, if this is just a generous impulse that you'll regret tomorrow, please tell me now. I don't think I could bear to get my hopes up only to— It's not an impulse, Anton assured her. It's one of the most clear-headed decisions I've made in a long time. Elena searched his face, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she found there. Then I look forward to your call, she said, and pushed through the door, returning to her role as an invisible server at an event where just an hour earlier, she had been the unexpected star. 3 days after the charity gala, Elena stood in front of the Musikverein, Vienna's golden temple to classical music. The famous concert hall gleamed in the morning sunlight, its neoclassical columns and carvings as intimidating as they were beautiful. Tourists snapped photos in front, but Elena barely noticed them. Her stomach was tied in knots. I must be crazy, she whispered to herself, clutching the worn leather music folder she had dug out from the back of her closet the night Anton had made his offer. She had almost called to cancel this meeting at least 5 times. Each time she had put down her phone and reminded herself that opportunities like this came once in a lifetime, if they came at all. She was 49 years old. If she didn't take this chance now, when would she? Elena took a deep breath and walked up the steps. Anton had told her to meet him at the artist's entrance around the side of the building. She found it easily. In her 20s, she had attended every concert she could afford, often buying the cheapest standing room tickets and dreaming of what it would be like to enter through that special door. Now here she was, pressing the buzzer, giving her name to the security guard, being waved through as if she belonged. Anton was waiting for her in a small practice room. He sat at the piano making notes on a score but stood when she entered. Elena. You came. He sounded genuinely pleased, as if he had half expected her to change her mind. I said I would, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the surreal feeling of being in this place with this man discussing a possible performance. How are you feeling about everything? Have you had time to think about my offer? Elena nodded, setting her folder down carefully. I've thought about little else, but before I agree to anything, I need to be honest with you. Anton gestured for her to sit in a chair near the piano while he returned to the bench. Please, go ahead. I haven't performed for an audience in 25 years. I practice regularly, yes, but playing alone in your apartment is very different. From playing on stage, my technique isn't what it once was. My hands— She looked down at them. They're stronger in some ways from years of physical work, but less flexible, less precise. Anton considered this. That's a fair concern. But what I heard at the gala didn't sound like someone with technical limitations. I was running on adrenaline and muscle memory, Elena admitted. And frankly, I was too nervous to think about being nervous, if that makes sense. A planned performance would be different. The expectations would be higher. We have a month to prepare, Anton pointed out. And you wouldn't be playing a full recital, just 2 or 3 pieces on your own and perhaps a duet with me. Elena's eyes widened. A duet? I thought it might be a nice way to present you. We could play something together. There's a wonderful arrangement of Rachmaninoff's Suite No. 2 that I think would suit us. The thought of playing alongside Anton, Volkov, matching her interpretation to his, responding to his musical ideas in real time, it was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd need access to a proper piano for practice, Elena said. still thinking practically despite the excitement building inside her. My upright at home isn't adequate for preparing concert repertoire. That's easily arranged. You can practice here. Anton gestured around the room. This is one of the rehearsal spaces reserved for artists performing at the Musikverein. I've booked it for us every morning for the next month. Elena stared at him. Every morning? But my job? Have you spoken with your employer yet? She shook her head. I wanted to be sure about this first. The catering company I work for is small. They rely on me for the major events. And if you told them you needed a leave of absence to prepare for a performance at the Musikverein? Elena gave a small laugh. They wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, they might not hold my position. Anton leaned forward. Would that be so terrible? If this goes well, it could lead to other opportunities. Teaching, if not performing. Master classes. Private students from wealthy families. That's a lot of ifs, Elena said, but she couldn't deny the appeal of his vision. To make a living from music again after all these years, it seemed like a fantasy. Let's start with the practical details, Anton suggested, sensing her hesitation. What pieces would you feel comfortable performing? Elena opened her folder and pulled out several well-worn scores. I've kept up with these over the years. Chopin's Ballade No. 1, which you heard, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in B minor, and Bach's Partita No. 2. Anton looked impressed. That's a challenging and beautiful program. The Bach is particularly interesting, not something casual pianists typically maintain in their repertoire. Bach keeps the mind clear and the fingers disciplined, Elena said, a hint of her old training showing through. My professor insisted we play Bach every day, like taking vitamins. Anton smiled at the comparison. Sound advice, may I? He gestured to her scores. Elena handed them over, suddenly self-conscious about the tattered condition of the pages, with their many pencil markings and worn edges. These scores had been with her through decades of private playing, silent witnesses, to a passion she had never abandoned, even when life had forced her to set aside her ambitions. Anton flipped through them with care, studying her notations. These are thoughtful markings, he observed. Very detailed fingerings. Did you work these out yourself? Elena nodded. Some are from my professors, but most are mine. Over the years, I've had to adapt certain passages to work better with my hands as they've changed. Anton returned the scores. I'd like to hear you play something now if you're comfortable. Not to judge you, he added quickly, seeing her tense, but to get a sense of how we might work together, how our musical sensibilities align. Elena hesitated, then moved to the piano. It was a Steinway concert grand, its black surface gleaming under the rehearsal room lights. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, acquainting herself with the action, which was much more responsive than her old upright at home. The Bach, perhaps, she suggested, positioning the score and taking a moment to center herself. Anton nodded and moved his chair to listen, giving her space. Elena began to play the opening of Bach's Partita No. 2. The familiar notes flowed from her fingers, precise and clear in the bright acoustics of the rehearsal room. She felt the initial nervousness fade as the music took over, her body remembering this piece that had been a constant companion throughout her adult life. She played only the first movement, not wanting to presume on Anton's time. When she finished, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression of deep concentration. Your Bach is exceptional, he said after a moment. So clean, but not mechanical. You understand the architecture of the piece. Elena felt a flush of pleasure at the professional assessment, not empty flattery but specific appreciation of her approach to the music. There's tension in your shoulders, Anton observed, and sometimes in your wrists. It's affecting your tone in the more demanding passages. I know, Elena sighed. Years of bad habits from practicing on an inadequate instrument, and from typing at office jobs, carrying trays. It can be addressed, Anton said confidently, with some technical exercises and conscious awareness. Your musicality is what matters, and that's clearly intact. He stood and walked to a small table where a folder of his own lay open. I've taken the liberty of drafting a preliminary program. Obviously, we can adjust it based on your preferences, but I wanted to give you something concrete to consider." He handed her a typed sheet. Elena scanned it, her eyes widening. "This presents me as an equal artist? Not as a novelty or a student. That's how I see you," Anton said simply. The program listed Elena performing the 3 pieces she had mentioned, plus a duet with Anton. His own solo selections were also noted, challenging works that complemented hers without overshadowing them. At the bottom was a proposed artist fee that made Elena blink in surprise. It was more than she earned in 3 months at her catering job. "This is too generous," she protested. "It's the standard fee for a guest artist of your caliber," Anton countered. "I won't undervalue you." Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them away. She wouldn't cry in front of this man who was treating her with such unexpected professional respect. "I need to think about this," she said, her voice not quite steady, "and speak with my employer." "Of course." Anton sat beside her on the piano bench, careful to leave appropriate space between them. "But before you go, I'd like to try something, if you're willing." He placed the Rachmaninoff duet arrangement on the piano. "Just the first page, to see how we play together." Elena nodded, positioning her hands for the secondo part while Anton took the primo. He counted them in quietly, and they began. The experience was unlike anything Elena had felt in years. Playing with another person, responding to his phrasing, matching his energy, adding her own voice to the musical conversation, awakened something she had almost forgotten. The joy of shared music making, of communication without words. They played through the first page, then the second, neither wanting to stop. When they finally paused, Elena was smiling without realizing it. "We're compatible," Anton said, sounding pleased but not surprised. "Musically, I mean. We listen to each other." "Yes," Elena agreed softly. "We do." An attendant knocked on the door, reminding Anton that his time in the rehearsal room was ending. Another artist was scheduled after him. "I need your answer by tomorrow," Anton said as they gathered their things. "If you decide to do this, we'll need to begin work immediately. A month isn't long to prepare." Elena nodded, clutching her folder to her chest as they walked out of the Musikverein and into the bright Vienna day. The reality of what she was considering hit her anew as they left the rarefied atmosphere of the concert hall. "What if I fail?" she asked suddenly, stopping on the sidewalk. "What if I agree to this, quit my job, practice for weeks, and then freeze on stage? Or play terribly? It would humiliate both of us." Anton considered her question seriously. "Music always involves risk," he said finally. "Every time I walk on stage, I risk failure. Technical problems, memory slips, interpretive choices that don't connect with the audience. These are possibilities for any performer, no matter how established. But you've proven yourself hundreds of times," Elena pointed out. "You have a track record of success that forgives occasional imperfections. I would be judged on this one performance." "Perhaps," Anton acknowledged. "But consider the alternative. You continue as you have been, working jobs that don't fulfill you, playing alone on your out-of-tune piano, never knowing what might have been possible." He met her eyes directly. "Which would you regret more?" The question hung between them, in the busy street. People flowed around them, tourists and locals going about their day, unaware of the life-changing decision being contemplated in their midst. "I'll call you tomorrow," Elena said finally, "with my answer." Anton nodded, respecting her need for space to decide. "Whatever you choose, I'm glad we met, Elena Petrova. You've already changed how I think about music and what it means to be a musician." As Elena walked toward the tram stop that would take her back to her small apartment in a less fashionable district of Vienna, her mind was racing with possibilities and fears. The practical concerns were real: giving up steady income, risking failure in a very public way, stepping back into a world she had left behind decades ago. But beneath these worries ran a current of excitement so strong it was almost painful. The chance to play on a proper stage, on a magnificent instrument for people who came specifically to hear music. The opportunity to reclaim the identity she had reluctantly set aside all those years ago. By the time she reached her apartment building, Elena had already decided what her answer would be. Some risks were worth taking, no matter how frightening. Some chances came just once in a lifetime. She would call Anton in the morning, but first, she would sit down at her faithful old upright piano and practice long into the night, reacquainting her fingers with the feeling of possibility. The Gläserner Saal, the glass hall of the Musikverein, sparkled under its crystal chandeliers. Every seat was filled. The audience was a mix of Vienna's cultural elite, regular concert-goers, and curious music lovers who had been intrigued by the unusual program. World-renowned pianist Anton Volkov performing alongside an unknown artist, named Elena Petrova. Backstage, Elena stood in the small green room, her hands cold despite the warmth of the building. She wore a simple black dress she had purchased for the occasion. Nothing flashy, but elegantly cut and appropriate for a classical recital. Her hair, usually in its practical bun, had been styled by a professional recommended by Anton's manager. She hardly recognized herself in the mirror. The past 4 weeks had been the most intense of Elena's life. After calling Anton with her yes, events had moved quickly. She had taken a leave of absence from the catering company, whose owner had been astonished but supportive when she explained the situation. Every day from 9 until 2, she had practiced in the Musikverein's rehearsal room, working through her program piece by piece, measure by measure. Anton had arranged for a piano tuner to visit her apartment and do what he could with her old upright, making it more responsive for her evening practice sessions. He had also connected her with his former teacher, an elderly pianist who still coached select students, who had helped Elena refine her interpretation and address the tension in her technique. They had worked on the Rachmaninoff duet twice a week, gradually finding a shared musical language. Elena had been intimidated at first, but Anton's approach had been so collegial, so respectful of her ideas, that she had gradually relaxed into a true artistic partnership. Now the moment of truth had arrived. In 20 minutes, she would walk onto a professional stage for the first time since her student days. There was a gentle knock at the door. Elena called, "Come in," expecting the stage manager who had been keeping her updated on the timing. Instead, Anton entered, already dressed in his concert attire of black tailcoat and white tie. He looked exactly like what he was, one of the world's leading pianists about to give a performance. Yet his expression when he saw her was one of genuine warmth rather than professional detachment. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Elena gave a shaky laugh. Terrified, excited, grateful, terrified again. Anton smiled. All appropriate emotions. He sat in the chair across from her. "I still get nervous, you know. After all these years and hundreds of concerts." "Really? You always seem so composed." "On stage? That's the professional mask," Anton admitted. "Inside, before every performance, there's a voice asking, 'What if tonight is the night it all falls apart? What if I've forgotten how to play? What if the audience hears all my flaws?'" Elena stared at him in surprise. "But you're Anton Volkov. And you're Elena Petrova," he countered. "We're both just people who love music enough to share it despite the fear." She nodded, feeling a weight lift slightly at his words. They were in this together, not as equals in fame or experience, perhaps, but as two artists facing the same fundamental challenge, connecting with an audience through music. "I wanted to give you something," Anton said, reaching into his pocket. "A small tradition in my family." He held out a smooth, flat stone, about the size of a coin, with a spiral pattern visible in its surface. "My mother gave me this before my first major competition," he explained. "It's a fossil, an ammonite, millions of years old. She told me to keep it in my pocket as a reminder that my nerves, my mistakes, my temporary struggles, all are tiny moments in the grand scale of time. It helps put things in perspective." "It's beautiful," Elena said, touching the stone gently. "It's yours for tonight," Anton said. "Alone, for good luck." Elena accepted the fossil, curling her fingers around its cool surface. The gesture touched her deeply, not just the loan of the talisman itself, but the fact that Anton understood what she was feeling and wanted to help. "Thank you," she said simply, slipping it into the pocket of her dress. A real knock came at the door, the stage manager this time, informing them they had 10 minutes until the performance began. Anton stood. "Remember what we talked about. The audience is here because they love music. They want you to succeed. And if anything goes wrong, keep going. The music is stronger than any mistake." Elena nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll see you out there." After Anton left, Elena closed her eyes and ran through her mental preparation one last time. She had done everything possible to be ready for this moment. She had practiced until her fingers knew the music by heart. She had visualized the performance countless times. Now she needed to trust herself and the music she had loved all her life. The stage manager returned to escort her to the wings. Elena could hear the murmur of the audience on the other side of the curtain, the rustling of programs, the quiet anticipation. Then the house lights dimmed, and a hush fell. The announcer welcomed everyone to the special recital series and introduced Anton, who walked on stage to enthusiastic applause. From her position in the wings, Elena watched as he bowed gracefully, then sat at the magnificent Bosendorfer piano and began his portion of the program. He played beautifully, a Bach prelude and fugue, followed by Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major. Elena listened, letting the music calm her nerves, reminding herself why she had accepted this challenge. Not for acclaim or recognition, but for moments like this, when notes on a page became living sound, touching something deep in the human spirit. All too soon, Anton was playing his final piece. After his bow, he would introduce her. Elena straightened her shoulders, touched the fossil in her pocket, and prepared to walk on stage. Anton finished to strong applause. After acknowledging the audience, he moved to the microphone. "For the next portion of our program," he said, "I'm honored to introduce a remarkable pianist who will be making her Musikverein debut tonight. Please welcome Elena Petrova." The applause. As Elena walked on stage was polite but reserved, the standard reception for an unknown artist. She felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her as she crossed to the piano, adjusted the bench, and took a moment to center herself. The first piece in her program was Bach's Partita No. 2. She had chosen to begin with it for its clarity and structure, a piece that would ground her if nerves threatened to take over. Elena placed her hands on the keys, took a breath, and began to play. The opening notes rang out clear and true in the perfect acoustics of the hall. Elena felt her body relax into the familiar patterns, her mind focusing entirely on the music. Bach's intricate counterpoint demanded complete concentration, leaving no room for worry or self-doubt. As she moved through the movements of the partita, Elena gradually became aware of the quality of the silence in the hall. The audience was listening, really listening, with an intensity she could feel from the stage. This wasn't polite attention for Anton Volkov's novelty guest. This was genuine engagement with the music she was creating. The Bach finished to warm. Applause. Elena's confidence grew as she moved to her second piece, the Rachmaninoff Prelude in B minor. Here she allowed herself more emotional expression, leaning into the Russian composer's rich harmonies and bittersweet melodies. The piece spoke of longing and memory, emotions Elena knew well after her years of setting aside her musical ambitions. When she began Chopin's Ballade, the piece she had played at the charity gala where Anton had discovered her, Elena felt herself fully inhabit the music. This was the piece that had reconnected her to her true self, and playing it now on this magnificent piano in this historic hall felt like completing a circle. Her fingers found new freedom in the technical passages, her interpretation balancing classical restraint with romantic passion. The final chords resounded through the hall, followed by a moment of complete silence. Then the applause began, not just polite or appreciative, but enthusiastic, with scattered bravos from around the room. Elena rose to take her bow, her heart pounding with emotion. As the applause continued, she saw Anton approaching from the tom wings. It was time for their duet, the Rachmaninoff Suite No. 2 arrangement they had practiced so carefully. He joined her at the piano, giving her an encouraging nod as they prepared to play together. The duet was pure joy. All the hours of rehearsal, all the careful coordination of interpretation and timing, came together in a performance that felt both precise and spontaneous. Elena and Anton responded to each other's musical ideas in real time, building the piece together as equal partners. The audience responded to this chemistry, their applause after the final movement the strongest of the evening. After multiple bows, Elena and Anton left the stage together. The moment the curtain hid them from view, Anton turned to her with a broad smile. "Magnificent," he said simply. "You were magnificent." Before Elena could respond, they were called back for another bow, and another. The applause showed no signs of diminishing. When they returned to the wings for the third time, the stage manager approached. "They want an encore," he said. "From both of you." Anton looked at Elena questioningly. "Are you up for it? We didn't prepare anything else together." Elena hesitated, only briefly. "The Schubert. We played through it once in rehearsal." Anton's eyes lit up. "Perfect." They returned to the stage, where Anton briefly addressed the audience, thanking them for their warm reception and announcing the encore, Schubert's Serenade in a four-hand arrangement. The piece was simple but profoundly beautiful, its melody one of the most beloved in classical music. As they played these final notes together, Elena felt a sense of peace unlike anything she had experienced before. Whatever came next in her life, whether this performance led to further opportunities or remained a beautiful memory, she had reclaimed something essential. She had remembered who she was at her core, not just Elena the catering server or Elena the former piano student, but Elena the musician, whose spirit spoke most clearly through the language of notes and phrases. The evening eventually came to an end. The audience departed, the stage lights dimmed, and Elena found herself in the green room again, surrounded by flowers that audience members had sent backstage. Anton's manager was speaking excitedly about the critics who had attended, about possible future engagements, about recording opportunities. Through it all, Elena remained quietly centered, still feeling the music resonating within her. When the room finally cleared, leaving just her and Anton, she returned the fossil to him. "It worked," she said with a smile. "Thank you for loaning it to me, and for everything else." Anton accepted the stone, turning it thoughtfully in his fingers. "You know," he said, "my mother also told me something else about this fossil. She said it's a reminder that beautiful things can remain hidden for millions of years, buried under layers of rock and time, waiting to be discovered." He looked up at Elena, his expression serious. "Some talents are like that too. Hidden but not diminished by the years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Or the right person to notice them." "I'm glad I did," Anton said simply. "What will you do now?" Elena considered the question. The evening had opened possibilities she hadn't dared imagine a month ago. Anton's manager had already mentioned interest from other concert promoters. There were discussions of recording projects, teaching opportunities. "I think," she said slowly, "I'll keep playing, wherever and however I can." "The music world will be richer for it," Anton replied. As they left the music verein together, stepping out into the Vienna night where stars shone above the historic city, Elena felt a profound gratitude. Life had taken her on a long and often difficult journey with many detours and disappointments. But somehow, against all odds, it had led her back to music, and to this moment where past and future met in perfect harmony.